the left trying to use this as, a sign that we are extremist, is, I think, very revealing. They are really threatened by traditional rosary praying Catholics.
Hello, Faith and Reason fans. We are coming to you, well, actually I am, here in our Front Royal studio, and we've been away for a couple of weeks, and what a couple of weeks. Yes, LifeSite had its 25th anniversary, which was awesome, and go check that out at lifesitenews.com for all the coverage of it. It was just truly amazing. But what a couple of weeks to be away from you for Faith and Reason, because we've had so many things happen. You've all heard that Fauci's resigned. Rand Paul just calling him out, saying, oh, by the way, resignation or not, you're still being investigated. We had the death of Rembert Weakland and the fallout of that taken up by Father James Martin, who normally is always in the good books of everyone. We just had in Moscow a bombing, which popularly people think took out one of Putin's chief advisor's daughters. And will there be war stemming from that? Those are some of the topics we're going to address here on this episode of Faith and Reason. We've got Jack Maxey, we've got Father James Altman, and we've got Liz Yore. We've got a full house. Stay tuned. Father, if you could lead us off with a prayer, please.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, as things continue to almost be incomprehensible in the world all around us, things happening every day, changing in a blink of an eye, let us keep our eyes focused always on you and how we get to you, which is through the cross of your Son. Give us the strength to climb the hard road to Calvary, and ask for this strength and this grace in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Liz, take it away for us, if you will. Give us a rundown.
The death of the 95-year-old Weakland, Rembert Weakland, the former Archbishop of Milwaukee, is an opportunity for all of us to reflect on the damage that this Archbishop did to the church in America, specifically in the Midwest. He, by the way, it's kind of interesting, Malachi Martin's fiction, what he calls fiction based on fact, Windswept House. One of the characters is Archbishop Cuthbert Delish, who happens to be Rembert Weakland. And Rembert Weakland was known, they called him sometimes Hootenanny Wembert, because he really attacked the Gregorian chant, ensured that the old mass would not be replicated. He really pushed hard for abolishing the Gregorian chant. He ushered in the Broadway liturgical tunes of Marty Haugen and Dan Schutt. Even more importantly than that, this man was, and I investigated clergy sex abuse throughout the 90s and 2000s. Weakland's name surfaced as very often as one of the most notorious predators, cover-up artists, radical leftists, unabashed modernists, which is real, all of those things were understatement. In 2002, he was accused publicly of sexually assaulting a younger man in the 1980s, and later paying him off with hush money to the tune of $450,000, which was taken from the coffers of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, money which he apparently paid back. But Weakland eventually apologized for the scandal of his conduct, but insisted it was not a rape, but that it was all consensual, and that he was in love with this individual, and that the whole thing was an affair. In fact, Weakland also admitted in 2009 to having several relationships with men during his tenure as Archbishop, and he chalked it up to loneliness because he became very lonely. So this is the Archbishop who has been not only pushing the destruction of the liturgy, destruction of the church. He was known for enormously, moving the sexual predators throughout his diocese, covering up their misbehavior and criminal conduct, also being absolutely dismissive of victims. And he was very, very aggressive in his cover-up abuse allegations, and he would castigate victims. And, many have felt that no bishop before or after Weakland has deployed such aggressive tactics to intimidate and silence victims. In fact, he was so discredited that when he retired, the global primate of the Benedictine order refused to let Rembert live at the Benedictine monastery. He also pushed for the ordination of women. He excoriated the church's teaching on sexuality and contraception, and encouraged priests to experiment in living at their parish rectories and go to have apartments instead. He was regarded, very nicely as saying he was a liturgical innovator. I think he was a liturgical destructor. But this man has been a disaster. He even was known to shred reports of clergy abuse. And, as far as I'm concerned, he destroyed the great Archdiocese of Milwaukee. And in my opinion, he is now gone, and thank God for that. But against his pernicious background and history with Rembert, James Martin stated that he has died. This is his Twitter account, an erudite scholar, a gifted pastor, a Benedictine abbot primate. His legacy was marred by revelations that he paid money to a man whom he had been in a relationship. I consider him a friend and mourn his loss. May he rest in peace. Well, I'll tell you, there was a huge Twitter firestorm. Even Listecki's comments were, frankly, quite benign, and in praising Rembert Weakland, which is, to me, they're trying to rewrite history. So interestingly, Martin had to back off his comments and recognize that he had, in my words, a sordid history in the church. These are the kinds of things that the church is now, into this very day, reeling with because of the loss of parishioners, because of the clergy abuse scandal, because of the cover-up, and because of the destruction of the liturgy. And by the way, his destruction and insisting that the Gregorian chant be suppressed was in direct contradiction to what was recognized and imposed by the Vatican II. Vatican II said that the Gregorian chant must be kept and protected in all liturgy. God rest his soul. He joins Bernardine, Cardinal Daniels in the hereafter, and God will be their judge.
The incredible damage is almost unfathomable. He was appointed in 1997 by Paul VI. If you think about it, that's a 25-year reign of absolute liberal hysteria in every single area in which the liberals pushed. And this is Rembert Weakland, who appointed homosexuals all over the place, was homosexual himself, as Liz said, $450,000 of diocesan money. He claimed it was his own. Then, we have to apologize, it wasn't, and I'll be paying back, etc., etc., etc. And then Father James Martin praises him, gets caught up, and one of the very few times he's forced to walk back something. So, unbelievable stuff. Father, I really need your take on it. What do the faithful do with this? How are the faithful supposed to react to this? How should the church be reacting to this? We've seen apologies for all sorts of things. What is with the praising, even from Listecki? But Father James Martin, that's almost the only surprising thing there is that he walked it back after some criticism. But give us your take, Father, if you would.
Well, Listecki actually took Weakland's name off of one of the buildings. So it was a step in the right direction. But he did so in an innocuous way where he said, we're not going to have anybody's names on the buildings. This is when people realized what an evil, despicable, deplorable, foul, false shepherd of the church Weakland was. One of the things he said, well, he excused his giving him almost $500,000, right? He said, well, it really was my money because I didn't take stipends during my time as the Archbishop. But the thing about that is, even now, back then, I think it was only $5 a Mass. Now I think it's 10. If you got a stipend for 365 days a year, that's 3,650. He was there, and I think he was in Milwaukee for about 10 years. That's only 36,500. And he's saying, oh, no, it was really my money. Right. And this is the first I've heard, by the way, that he paid it back. And if he did, I'd like to know how in the world did he pay it back? Where does a shepherd of the Catholic Church have that kind of money to pay back that kind of sum that he took, that he could have used his own money to begin with, right? Which he didn't. He used the church's money. That's a crime. Whether you pay it back or not, that's called restitution, but it's a crime. But he wasn't charged with a crime, was he? And he held his faculties to the very end. They were never taken away. Look at the canceled priests, right? One of his spawn is the guy down there, Malloy, in Rockford, Illinois, who's canceled at least a dozen priests, taking away their faculties. Look at that guy in my diocese who was doing what Weakland was doing, and he has his faculties back, and he's got a parish 12 miles down from where I am. They don't care. That's why James Martin can get away with what he says. And finally, as you said, John Henry and Liz, finally he gets a little bit of a pushback because these people are so out of touch with the general sentiments of the true faithful of the church. They don't understand how disgusting and sickening it is. And this is, you can say what you like. Is Rembert Weakland, where is he likely to be? Heaven, or is he burning in hell? The fact of the matter is, he did not apologize to the people. He did not confess and say, I was wrong. Instead, he justified what he did. And so what he's done is he's continued in his death through James Martin, continue to excuse and his behavior and thus lead lambs astray. And what did Jesus say about that? Better you get the great millstone around your neck and thrown in the deep blue sea, which to the Jewish mindset, the culture of the time, meant you were going to burn in hell because you got an improper burial, among other things. I mean, Weakland is one of the great disasters of the American Catholic Church, and yet where are the bishops? Where are the bishops standing up and saying he was a disgrace to the Catholic Church? Good riddance. Shake the dust from our sandals against Rembert Weakland. By the way, you know this, how he destroyed the liturgy? So he destroyed, it's renowned, his desecration and sacrilege to the cathedral of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. And what that fox did, he destroyed the sanctuary, and then he put up this massive organ pipe thing in it. So he created a big white elephant, because you cannot get rid of the destruction that he wrought without incurring a fortune in costs. So he made sure it could not be restored to its prior glory. He took a beautiful, incredible cathedral and he destroyed it, and he made sure it couldn't be restored. So Rembert Weakland, I have no doubt where you are. And I only hope to God I don't end up where you are. Birds of a feather flock together. We understand this concept. Birds of a feather flock together. All you need to know is that James Martin is holding up Rembert Weakland as a good guy. And then also understand that the Bishop of Rome, Jorge Bergoglio, wrote James Martin a nice handwritten letter praising his work, right? Birds of a feather. Understand this, faithful Catholics. Understand who you're dealing with and who the bad guys are. And Rembert Weakland is amongst the worst.
I think the common thread here is their hatred of the Latin liturgy. People say that the devil hates Latin. And if you think about it, evil has to... Vigano just said a week or so ago that the children of light far outnumber the children of darkness. And the children of light used to be bound by their shared experience in the Mass through the Latin liturgy, which bound them in a common language of faith for all four corners of the globe. And these same people who are promoting these other evils in the church are suppressing that thing that bound the faithful together for over 2,000 years. And I don't find any coincidence in it. I think they're both deeply, deeply connected. And they know that in order to promote their way of life or their worldview, they have to destroy the Catholic Church. And they've been doing it from the inside for a long time. This started out with the Soviets all the way back in the 30s. And you see what's been going on in Latin America for the last 50 years. Now to the point where in Nicaragua, we're imprisoning bishops and threatening the lives of priests. And Bergoglio doesn't even make comment about this. So I think that one of the things that everybody could do is, we always say the Rosary is the most powerful thing that we can do. And I've been trying to train myself to say it in Latin, because I think it's just a little bit of a extra edge on your blade against the evil one. So to me, that's the central point of all of this, from the German bishops on down.
Rembert Weakland, if I'm not mistaken, he required anyone who wanted to go to a Latin Mass to have a special permission slip to get into it. And actually, Jack, now that you mentioned the Rosary, it's a very interesting thing that happened last week when we weren't able to do Faith and Reason, and that was that The Atlantic had an article in it talking about the Rosary as a weapon. Liz, why don't you give us background on that?
Certainly, I have my AK-15 here. I am now a Christian nationalist. The enemy has identified our weapon. You know, sometimes the enemy knows us better than we know ourselves, correct? All of a sudden, the whole internet, social media went crazy. Catholics were posting pictures, their profile pictures of their rosary. People were really talking about the Rosary, the power of the Rosary, what the Blessed Mother and the saints have said about the Rosary. The left trying to use this as, you know, a sign that we are extremist is very, I think, very revealing. They are really threatened by traditional Rosary praying Catholics. And what all of us have talked about in the show is that Francis has been really the leader of calling, you know, nationalists, backwardists, restorationists, rigidists. And here the left is saying the very same thing about traditional Catholics, because in their heart, they know that the Christian nationalists, the Catholics, with the power of their Rosary, are going to save the culture. They're going to save civilization. The Rosary has acquired a militaristic meaning for radical, traditional, red trad Catholics. Well, here we are, folks. If we don't know the power of our Rosary, it's time to do so. And I think these sacramental beads are going to be helping all of us in fighting to restore our faith, to restore our church, to restore our society. And the media attacks on our devotions and sacramentals are going to continue. We now know that Francis has continued to attack our devotions and our traditional liturgy. And Francis, when he went to Canada, was silent over the burning of the 60 churches. He's been silent over the persecution of the faithful Catholics. And so we saw, I've been following since this attack on the Rosary. There were two events that were playing out. One, a massive rally in front of the Papal Nuncio in Washington, D.C., demanding a restoration of the traditional Latin Mass. There are Rosary rallies in public squares happening this weekend for the canceled priests. There are Rosary rallies in front of all of the cathedrals. So this is going to grow. And I think this is a movement. Thank you to the Atlantic radical who wrote this article, is really kind of pointing us in the direction that we need to go. And Jack, I love your idea. I think Catholics need to learn the Latin, the Rosary in Latin, all of our prayers in Latin. I think that is a great call to action.
Liz, you and I were laughing about this the other day when they called it a radical symbol. I said we should all just become like Mexican cab drivers. So when you pull into the supermarket, they know exactly who you are. It should be hanging from your rearview mirror. Let people know that you are a radicalized Catholic. And the other thing, let's be clear, one of the reasons both the leaders of the church and also the popular culture so despise the Rosary is because they despise what Mary represents, right? She represents the original nuclear family, right? She's the mother of God and the mother of the Holy Family. And she represents all of the virtues that we have created over 2,000 years and extolled amongst our womanhood. And now we've seen all of the things that she represents undermined for 50 years. So to see her in an ascendant position destroys so many of their narratives. And this is why you're seeing a unification amongst the left, both inside our own church and in the temporal sphere, the sort of, shall we say, fascist communist sphere, in their desire to destroy her. And this is why we should all be so joyful when we can go to our knees and celebrate her as often as we can.
Mother of modesty, humility, purity. Of course they want that killed. Father, what's your take on the Holy Rosary?
An amazing thing we should understand by the left's attack on the Holy Rosary is they're doing it because they know it works. It's an affirmation of the power of the Rosary that our Blessed Mother has been telling us about since, well, long before Fatima, but certainly since Fatima, about this is, in fact, our weapon, as Padre Pio called it. So many great people have called it, this is our weapon. But what is important to understand, and we can get all shook up about this Atlantic guy, and I do, and I say, why is it that the bishops of the United States, why isn't it that the nuncio, why hasn't Jorge Bergoglio himself stood up and defended this attack on Catholics? I mean, it's a direct, full frontal assault on Catholics. Why haven't they done so? Well, as I said down in Florida at Naples at the 25th anniversary, why should we be surprised that the public is the civil world is attacking the Holy Rosary when the bishops of our church, like Rembert Weakland, have been attacking it for the last half century, kicking out seminarians who had a devotion to our Blessed Mother through praying the Rosary. I can't tell you the number, countless, legion are the number of priests who had to go undercover praying the Rosary in seminary over the last 50 years because they would have been kicked out by the Rembert Weaklands or any of the other devotionals, even such as things as adoration of the Blessed Sacrament, kicked out for that. Praying a prayer in Latin, are you kidding me? I mean, never mind the fact that all these filthy liars that say that they are trying to follow the spirit of Vatican II. Vatican II specifically said Gregorian chant. Rembert Weakland, Vatican II specifically said that there should be Latin prayers in every single Mass. They are filthy liars who misrepresent everything about it, and that includes Jorge Bergoglio, who's trying to crush the traditions. Why are we surprised that Jorge Bergoglio or any of these other people are trying to crush the traditions of the Catholic Church, the sacred traditions, when in fact they've been attacking it for the last 50 years and kicking out seminarians who would have been supportive, who would have been lived a life of faith and devotion? So we can't be surprised that the majority of bishops in our day and age are contrary to, against our sacred tradition of the Catholic Church, against such things as devotions to the Holy Rosary, because that's all that got through seminary for the last 50 years. So of course they now have attained to that age group that are now bishops. We cannot be surprised by this. We recognize it for what it is, but it should tell us by their very attack that they know full well it is the one thing that works. And as my great aunt said way back in the 60s, I can still see it as if it were yesterday. It was right after Vatican II, and there I am, a little boy, maybe 8, 9 years old, and she's sitting on the couch and she's clutching her rosary. And she said this, and I quote, "I don't care what they say, they're not taking away my rosary." Well, I'm a Catholic today because of my family background that includes great Aunt Fran. So keep your rosaries, pray your rosaries, but I'm not telling you anything our Blessed Mother didn't already do. And as for the Rembert Weaklands and every other bishop in the United States who did not stand up and publicly condemn that Atlantic writer, well, yeah, good luck. You've now abused Jesus's mother, and that will never have a good ending.
We cannot doubt for one moment that Roe versus Wade was overturned because of the 50 years of praying the Rosary in front of that abortion mills. And I would urge everybody, our AR-15, no more concealed carry. As Jack said, put it on your car, carry extra rosaries that you can hand out to folks. Pray it on the beach, pray it in your neighborhood, pray it in front of the public square. It's time to go public. You know, Pius X said, if there were 1 million families praying the Rosary every day, the entire world would be saved and there would be peace. And boy, if we aren't on the brink of World War III, and if Our Lady hasn't given us this gift to stop world wars and bring peace to the world, I mean, the time is now, folks.
The one thing also I think we have to be reminded about Bergoglio, I don't want to play the church psychologist here, but remember, he admitted shortly after taking the job that he had stolen the rosary from his Monsignor confessor's hands in the cathedral or basilica in Buenos Aires, and he wore it around his neck as an act of contrition. So he obviously has some issues concerning our mother and the Holy Rosary already. He's obviously a broken guy, in my opinion, but I'm very much of the opinion. I like to do things like cross myself before I get on elevators, cross myself before I go through a door sometimes, just like the medieval church. And, no one's offended. People sometimes, you see sometimes older people reflexively do it themselves. So there's power in expression, and particularly if you do it as part of your daily life.
In case anybody wonders about what Jack just said, look it up, but also what Father was saying about Pope Francis vis-a-vis the Rosary. Remember one of the very first of those leaked interviews that has now become totally famous? At the time, we wouldn't cover it LifeSite because even though it was massive, it was the first revelation of a gay lobby in the Vatican. But if you look back at that coverage from 2013, you'll notice LifeSite didn't cover that. You know why? Because the same leaked interview had Pope Francis bashing the Rosary of sorts. He was talking about someone gave him a spiritual bouquet of 1,500, whatever it was, rosaries. And he was angry at that. Why the counting? But there's one other thing about Pope Francis, and I think we need to give everybody a heads up right now, because at the end of this month, there is a consistory. Pope Francis is named, I think, 20 new cardinals. It's going to bring up actually the number of cardinals to 132, even though it's only supposed to be 120 cardinal electors. Now, there's going to be more cardinals than 132, but there's going to be 132 by end of this month that are electors, which is abnormal. Not the first time it's been done anyway, but whatever. It's also a private consistory, which means it's not open to the public. And they're going to go over some of the Pope's reforms of the Curia. There's some debate. I think Joan of Rome, for the EWTN correspondent there, thinks perhaps he might announce a resignation. Any more details on that?
And also the Pope is going down to Aquila in Italy, which is the place that Pope Celestine went to. And I think there was a healing ceremony, forgiveness ceremony that he started back in the 1200s. And that's where Celestine said that it was all right for the Pope to resign. And lo and behold, Pope Celestine resigned. So there's speculation that Pope Francis is going down to Aquila to kind of duplicate again the resignation. I don't know. I have my doubts. Joan Lewis, who is really a Vaticanista and has seen a lot of the writing on the wall, says there's all sorts of activity going on, documents being signed and promoted, people being appointed, positions being filled. This consistory itself is a sign, she thinks. So we'll see. I think there's plenty of work that hasn't been done. He has to carry out the new Abrahamic faith initiative in 2023. Pope Francis also is going to be also doing some other New World Order globalist initiatives that have been really on his agenda. So I suspect that it may be a head fake, but we'll see. So I think all eyes on the Vatican the next week to see what happens. Apparently, there's a document that has been in draft form regarding the reform of the Roman Curia that has been I think they've been waiting 9 years for this document. They are going to read that document and make suggestions, comment on that document. And so that's kind of the justification for everybody coming together, including the appointment of the new 20 cardinals, of course, one of which is McElroy from America.
If that document is, I believe that document was the Predicate Evangelium, which was published in Italian first and then no English translation, sort of released without fanfare. I believe that was the one. Father, your take on the new consistory and what the plans are in Rome, any inside scoop for us?
Well, the first thing, just as to the consistory and naming these cardinals in a very secretive manner or having it to be a very private affair. I actually was at the consistory when Cardinal Burke received the red hat, and it was very public. The St. Peter's was so incredibly packed. It was basically shoulder to shoulder. So holding this thing in private is bizarre, especially because it's not like the place would be packed, because in August, nobody's in Rome. As you know, everybody exits Rome because it's so darn hot there. Maybe it's a harbinger of their future, the hot. The thing about McElroy is, I guess, is he the only one from America? I'm not sure. Is that, as we saw in the McCarrick case, that the only person that can put a cardinal on trial is the Pope himself. So by giving McElroy the red hat, he has now elevated him above the reaches of the church's courts. So it is now coming out that McElroy actually did cover up, as who's surprised by this, for instance, the satanic rape of a woman out there. And so by putting him at this level of cardinal, he's beyond the touch of the collegial courts. They can't even investigate it. Only the Pope can. So he, in essence, gave his friend a get out of jail free card. He gave him a presidential pardon. This is just, why are we surprised by this? I'm not. When he reinstituted or rehabilitated his good buddy, Theodore McCarrick, why do we have any doubt about the nature of Jorge Bergoglio? But there you have it. So as to whether or not he'll retire, certainly it's been suggested he's stacked the deck already with all the cardinals. Now by adding beyond the norm, another 12 above and beyond the amount that normally is already stacked in his favor because of all his appointments, he's all but ensured that a Francis II, or whatever name he chooses, will be coming after him. I guess what I would say is my own opinion. This is just my opinion, that we have not yet experienced Good Friday as apostles, as faithful Catholics. We have not yet seen the Good Friday of the church. And so remember, Jesus said, I tell you all this in advance so that when it happens, your faith will not be shaken. Well, we better hold fast to the truths of the faith, the unchanged, unchangeable truth, because we're seeing it fall apart before our eyes because of people like Jorge Bergoglio and like McElroy. And so when it happens, when the Good Friday of the church happens, when the church dies or has the appearance of death, remember Jesus' death, yes, he was dead, but it wasn't to be forever. The grave could not hold him. We just have to know that no matter how bad it looks in the church, no matter how bad it looks that the church is destroyed, that there will be Easter Sunday. For the truly faithful, we will rise again with our Savior, as will his church. Because sometimes I get a little discouraged myself when you see evil winning right up to the highest echelon of the church. But don't get discouraged, because because we are faithful Catholics, that we will rise again.
Here's something to think about when we look at the destruction of our church and the sort of packing of the College of Cardinals, and we compare the internal decay and what we can all perceive is a corrupt apex of our faith. And now I think the Catholics, this is where it comes into the Atlantic article, should also be able to see the same exact breakdown inside our blessed government that we have seen inside of our blessed church. And it's the same actors. It's the same people working hand in hand. I mean, we should throw up the picture of Hunter Biden and Joe Biden getting a blessing from Francis in, I think, 2014. These are all working in conjunction. And just as they have to destroy the United States of America to have their global reset, they have to also destroy the Catholic Church. So both of these outcomes are very, very intertwined. Just as we are the ones as Americans who are the defenders of liberty and justice around the world, the Catholic Church is the defender of the true faith. And so both must be destroyed because they are two of the principal legs of the stool that holds up this civilization. So, that and capitalism. So we need to be very wary, and we need to see all of this as part of a grand struggle between the children of light and the children of darkness. And I am reminded again of Vigano's words that Liz spoke of 2 weeks ago. We outnumber them. So be not afraid.
I just heard this yesterday, Jack, and you probably know this, Liz and John Henry, you know this, that all of a sudden the Vatican has said every single Catholic thing pretty much has to put their money into the Vatican Bank, which is, of course, beyond the reach of, as a separate country that it is, inspection by anybody else. So is this not part of, or is this part of what they know is coming? That they have to marshal all the resources in one place that's immune from inspection? There's something really funny going on as you watch the global economy collapse and Rome sucking in all its dollars beyond the reach of anybody else. There's something going on, and we'll find out. It'll play itself out. But yeah, don't lose hope, Jack, like you're saying.
Father, maybe the next president and treasurer can remove them from the SWIFT system to make their little vacuum operation a little more difficult because of all of their corrupt activities.
Yeah, that happened before the resignation of Pope Benedict, so maybe again. Just a quick note before we return. If you would like to stay up to date on LifeSite's coverage of the latest life, family, and culture news, subscribe to one of our many newsletters by going to lifesitenews.com/subscribe. And if you'd like to help us bring our truth-telling coverage to millions around the world, please consider making a one-time or monthly donation at give.lifesitenews.com. And now, back to the video. One of the other interesting things, and it actually ties into something we have to get to, is that, Liz, you were talking about other items that Francis still has to fulfill before retirement. One of those is the promised visit to Moscow, because if you recall, right before he came to Canada, people were doubting, it's going to close down, he's not going to come. He said, no, publicly, no, I'm coming to Canada, and then I'm going to Moscow right after. And speaking of Moscow, there's been a big escalation in the last days with the attempted assassination of Alexander Dugin. They didn't get him, they sort of switched cars, and his daughter was blown up right in Moscow. And so there's a lot of wonder if this is going to spark a larger war or what it is. I'd love to get your take on that, Jack.
Well, a lot of people have been describing this guy Dugin as the sort of Rasputin or spiritual advisor of Putin. And I don't believe that's the case. In fact, I looked, you can't find any photographs of these guys together. There's no indication that they've actually ever met. As I described it earlier, this guy is sort of a voice piece inside the popular culture for a greater Russia, bringing back the old territory, almost a kind of fascist point of view that may in some ways mesh with Putin's apparent actions. But I don't know that I would describe him as a close advisor of Putin. But I would say that obviously they thought that they were going to stir up a hornet's nest by targeting this guy or maybe even targeting his daughter. And the interesting thing to me was that the Russians came out quite quickly with a photograph and documents and describing exactly who the assassin was. And we haven't exactly seen that disputed by the Ukrainians. So I would say that perhaps the Russians are telling the truth. Now, on another level, yes, could this accelerate the war? Perhaps. But I think what's maybe even worse is the Ukrainians trying to destroy that bridge that the Russians are using to bring a material across. And I think that I said this very early. I think the Russians' aim is to at least capture a country up to the Dnieper River And it's fascinating to look back at the Donetsk operation, it was called, or sometimes the Ukrainian offensive of 1943, where the Russians were pushing the Germans out of their territory. And very similarly, the overwhelming power of Russian artillery played a tremendous role in that. To a certain extent, this kind of defense in depth, where you're seeing the Ukrainians roll back 3 kilometers every day or every other day, reminds me very much of that. And just coincidentally, I'm not making a prediction, but the big push came in the fall, and it was all over by December. So that to me is interesting. The other side of the coin, or what I said would be very frightening, is if the Russians just decided to take out all the bridges on the Dnieper and cut off this resupply of the Ukrainians on their defensive perimeter, and also cut off their retreat. I was speaking to someone about that yesterday, because it does seem to me that the Ukrainians are trying to ratchet up the costs here. Interestingly, Zelensky past week said that he knew the Russians were going to invade, but he didn't tell the Ukrainian people. He's been getting a lot of criticism about this. He said it would have destroyed the economy and people would have fled earlier. One of the contradictions of this whole war is that about 10%, or no more, about 15% of the Ukrainian people have left the country, including military-aged men. I am not certain that the enthusiasm for this continued war, where the Ukrainians are losing, say, 200 to 300 young men a day, is really there. But there was a very interesting twist. I'm sorry for going on so long. Yesterday, Erdogan, who is the leader of Turkey, who did not participate in the sanctions against Russia, who has a very close economic relation with Russia, including getting 45 to 50% of their natural gas from Russia, came out and stated quite clearly that there can be no peace without the return of Crimea to the Ukrainian people. And he referenced the suffering of the Tatar minority inside Ukraine, which of course is a historical Turkish ethnic group. It was Catherine the Great who pushed the Turks out of present-day Ukraine. So that is an interesting twist to me. I think it's a bit of grandstanding, because, again, right, why does he want to get cut off? The Russians sold, I think they said, something like 30 or 40% more gas this last quarter than they did last year. I don't think that they're suffering the way that people say that they are. I think that one of the risks of a terrorist act like this on their soil inside Moscow is to probably make the hardliners a little bit more hardline, and make the people sitting on the fence decide which side they're going to get off on, which I think is only going to increase the spirit of the Russian people to continue. I don't see the same for Ukraine. I think that we're starting to see with these little leaks about Zelensky, perhaps that he's losing favor in the West to a certain extent. Remember, quite a few people have paid a price for their adoration of Mr. Zelensky, the comedian, one of them being Boris Johnson, one of the greatest hawks. He was rejected by his own party, I think in part because of his aggressive stance in Ukraine. The same happened in Italy. I think you're seeing Macron willing to kind of perhaps negotiate. He just said today that the French people have to be prepared for things to get worse. They're going to drop the subsidy on gasoline. Western Europe is absolutely suffering. The euro just dropped below $1 in parity. This is the first time since, I think, 2000. There are a lot of things on the march, and I think that a lot of people are beginning to recognize that it was U.S. meddling from day one that has dragged the West into this looming cold economic winter that we seem to be approaching. And there are troubles everywhere. I mean, for example, the drought in China. They're already warning that their harvest might not be very good. The World Food Program is now delivering grain all over Africa. We're headed for a very rough year. And the biggest problem that we've been suffering, from Ukraine to our internal politics to China to our own church, has been the secret nature of all of the machinations that got us here. The lack of clarity for those who must suffer both in the pews and on the streets has been something that I think needs to change. I think we need to have open hearings about everything to do with Hunter Biden and the corruption and the betrayal to the Communist Chinese, not just by Hunter, but by hundreds of people and very strong entities from the CIA and FBI and State Department, Department of Justice, to major law firms throughout Washington, D.C. I think that we need to begin to peel, shall we say, the tinfoil off this hidden casserole of corruption that affects both the church and our own government and the West. And we're seeing the bitter fruit of the attempts to keep all of that hidden right now. And I also want to say we're looking at the year anniversary of our cowardly escape from Afghanistan, where we left $5.5 billion of U.S. weapons, making them one of the most well-equipped armies in the world. Somebody has to pay a price for these failures.
Do you remember, and this is so biblical, there were all the plagues. And as a boy, and I didn't understand theology or what the heck was going on, why did God choose like frogs or some of these other plagues did he choose? Why did he choose them? Well, the reason is because the people at the time were holding them up as some of their gods. And God was trying to say, these are not, your frogs are not your God. I am your God alone, right? The God of Israel. So follow me. And of course, then their hearts were hardened in the end. And even after the death of the firstborn, man and beast alike, they still chased them down and tried to get them. So what I think what's happening here, when you see the government, as you said, Jack, when you see that they failed us, what has happened is maybe people's eyes will finally be open to realize that these elites, these corporate giants, these people in government are not our God. They can't take care of us. And what brings this to mind is somebody sent me a meme today, and it's Antonin Scalia. And this is what he had to say. The transformation of charity into legal entitlement has produced donors without love and recipients without gratitude. What we've done then is we've turned our, under the age of 30, it's almost universal, it seems, have turned our younger people into people who look to the government as their God, not God, but the government. And when that happens, of course, then well, look what governments, tell me one government in the history of humanity that has ever been, benevolent. So I think what's happening here, when we see all this, the world collapsing all around us and the governments failing miserably and people dying in droves, including China, including Africa, including, look what's happening in Europe. My goodness, I remember what it was like, 1.5 euros to the dollar. And it was very expensive for us to go over there. When the people finally see this, maybe they will wake up and say, government is not God. We better turn back to God. Start with the Holy Rosary, as our Blessed Mother told us.
What a great segue, Father, into our final piece here. And that's about Anthony Fauci, who really did think himself sort of God. Let's watch this clip where he basically thinks he's the best thing since sliced bread. And then he resigns a week later. Take a look.
So if they get up and criticize science, nobody's going to know what they're talking about. But if they get up and really aim their bullets at Tony Fauci, well, people could recognize there's a person there, there's a face, there's a voice you can recognize, you see him on television. So it's easy to criticize, but they're really criticizing science because I represent science.
To them, you are a symbol of the restrictions that came along with COVID-19. Of course, Republican lawmakers and you have clashed many times, and they are expected to take over the House this fall potentially. And they promised to investigate you if they did. Did that have any role in your departure?
None at all, Caitlin, really, none at all, not even a slight amount. I have nothing to hide, and I can defend everything I've done.
So he comes right off there, and now a quick resignation. And you were talking, Jack and Father, about wanting to cover up and hide these things and not be transparent. I think Rand Paul picked up on that real quick, this resignation, because he says right away, oh, and by the way, that resignation is not going to stop the investigation into you. Liz, I'd love to hear your take.
Well, Frankenstein Fauci finally resigns. It's almost impossible to categorize all the pain, suffering, and death he caused, going even back during the AIDS crisis in the 1980s. It's shocking when you give an unelectable bureaucrat enormous power over people's lives. And, to Jack's point, Fauci is going to the apex of the China, US, global elites power center. And this unbelievable goal to depopulate the earth, to impose a global world order. At the center of this was Anthony Fauci, who his decisions, all wrong, to shut down the world, to shut down the schools, to shut down the churches, to shut down lives and businesses, caused untold destruction. And then to impose a mandated vaccine that was untested, that was an experimental jab. He continues to this day demanding control over our lives. Hold on, this is going to be a wild ride. But at the center of the global agenda was this 50-year bureaucrat who called the shots that has really caused this spinning out of control of our civilization. And you're going to see, I think, much like in the Hunter Biden laptop, when the world sees all of it on display, just like the Hunter Biden laptop, you're going to see the machinations behind Fauci, his collaboration with the Wuhan lab, his collaboration with the Metabiota labs in Ukraine. This man, in his arrogance, is going to be hopefully held accountable by the world for his absolute destruction and genocide of the world. And I'm glad he's gone, just like Weakland is gone. We have to make sure that he stays gone and that he isn't working his diabolical magic behind the scenes.
Everyone, take out your weapons and use them this week. And we'll see you next week on Faith and Reason. Hi everyone, this is John Henry Westen. We hope you enjoyed this video, and to see more like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button below to get all the latest content from LifeSite News. So check out our links in the description to read more, sign up for our newsletter, and connect with us on social media so that you can stay up to date with all of the latest life, family, and culture news. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you.